Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, I'm excited to have Felix Ruano, CEO, founder, and CEO of Onetera, to the podcast. Welcome, Felix.
Thanks for having me, William.
So, Felix, you're a serial entrepreneur at this point. You've co-founded one venture a while back, and now you're onto this new adventure with Terra now, just, I believe, freshly launched this year, right? I believe it was like
Yeah, early
January,
summer.
February of this year.
Yeah.
Perfect. Uh, Tell us about One Terra and why you decided to kind of focus on scaling up this new whole venture.
Yeah. So thank you again for having me. And excited to give sort of the early story on where again, you mentioned we're just getting started, but a lot of exciting reasons why you decided to start the company and along with a really great founding team. I'll give you the short version and I'm excited to have, a conversation about it and more follow-up questions. But the short version is, yeah, my previous company was in education technology, and the sort of the through line for my whole sort of entrepreneurial journey has been finding ways that technology, especially a technology that can reach as many people as possible in terms of software as a service tools, were able to support the public sector. And so K-12 was my foray into that theme, and last year started really uncovering a broader opportunity that went beyond K-12, which is really the local public sector, which encompasses local government, but also a lot of the adjacent organizations. So, K-12 systems, county offices and local agencies. The sort of the thesis from the beginning has been, what role can a company play, a third party private technology company play in these really complex systems that are so important for the well-being and sort of success of entire communities that no individual institution can play. And what I kept coming back to was this role of being a bridge builder as a company, right? And you've seen this a lot in the private sector in terms of marketplaces that can connect different stakeholders and entities together. There hasn't really been that sort of opportunity or success story in the public sector, and definitely not at the local government level. So that was the beginning of sort of the first part of the company, which is saying, can we, like, step one, be a bridge builder in the same way, you'll have, real estate tech companies that connect, buyers and sellers. You have fintech companies like Plaid that will connect banks and users, and to be able to do that in the public sector was sort of foundational to anything we did sort of on top of that. So first and foremost, Onetera is the single source of truth for any local government interaction with residents, right? That by itself is not a business model or a business opportunity. The bigger opportunity is saying, okay, if we are the single source of truth by connecting different entities and residents, what can we now do that wasn't previously possible? And for our early team, the answer immediately became figure out ways to use conversational AI to dramatically transform the resident and government experience, right? So if you think about the status quo, and this is sort of across socioeconomic levels, across geographies, the average experience with any local government sort of interaction, the average experience is sort of rife with tons of pain points, right? And I don't have to go into here, sort of anyone who's ever gone to a local sort of agency or institution has felt slow response, no single source of truth, sort of everything that is sort of outdated in terms of even digital experiences. So it's not just paper experiences, but digital experiences have become outdated. So our response to that, and sort of the basis of the company, is now, how can we use conversational AI paired with a single source of truth to facilitate entire resident services end to end. So just to make it very real, what it looks like in practice is, and housing is our first use cases. Instead of a resident going through the traditional flow of maybe requesting a PDF form or having to call in to submit an interest for a specific service like affordable housing or rental assistance. 90% of the experience is now replaced with a conversational agentic AI, so that can, one, take care of the initial interest and eligibility step, but then
Hmm.
be the sort of support agent across, applications, troubleshooting any questions. There's still the
Hmm.
human in the loop in terms of local government, but now we've dramatically improved the efficiency of the whole process. So that's it in a nutshell. But again, happy to start going into that in detail.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned, I think, as you said, right, there's a lot of inefficiencies within local government systems. I'm a bit surprised, honestly, that there hasn't been like kind of an attempts or success in this area before. Why do you think that is, that there hasn't been like kind of any drastic improvement in efficiencies for local governments?
Yeah, I think like a lot of industries, it's not just public sector. Has been tons of attempts, right? Fintech, real estate, there's health tech. There's so many attempts. I think the previous attempts have missed a couple things. One is there's been so many attempts that have generated point solutions for specific departments or use cases within local government. So
Okay.
you might have gotten like unoptimized version for specific use case. So companies will create, a flow for housing and a flow for permitting or flow for parks and recs.
Yeah.
The big thing that that misses is the ability then for to dramatically improve the experience by having the resident, carry their data across different use cases. So
Right.
you have in the industry today legacy sort of big companies, some of them public enterprises that have basically a portfolio of point solutions, but have never really created a unified experience. And they also have deployed those solutions in very sort of localized ways, as
Hmm.
opposed to created almost like a marketplace experience. So what that looks like is, you know, big GovTech company will contract with a city to create a solution for their specific instance. So a resident will have the experience of going through that specific point solution. But if they want to go use a
Right.
different service, they have to go through the full experience. Or if they go 5 blocks to a different city, and now they're a totally different entity, right? And so I think
Hmm.
in short, we've sort of are taking inspiration, but from a lot of enterprise sort of private sector companies that have
Hmm.
shown that if you can create sort of experience that cut across use cases and geographies, that ultimately it's going to create a better experience for everyone, right? So I think there's been a lot of attempts, but I don't think anyone has approached it from a sort of marketplace, use case and geography agnostic approach, which is harder, but we think it's worth the effort.
Yeah, that's definitely really interesting. Well, you say you're tackling housing now. So what's an example of how
Yeah.
is Onetera tackling housing
Yes.
inefficiencies
So
with
we're
city
very
government?
focused. Yeah. So we're focused. Housing is a massive, challenge across states and, um, institutions. We are very focused, or we are initially only focused, I should say, on the resident facing activities. So that means not focused on the sort of pre-build, pre-lease experience of development and permitting, and there are some really great companies tackling those pain points. We're saying when there's a service or an opportunity like affordable housing lottery or waitlist or a rental assistance that now is being offered to the public. That's the sort of journey that we want to impact and support. So I'll give you a very real experience for one of our first cities that we're serving is the city of El Monte. They have a portfolio of about 30 some affordable housing properties. Most of these are nonprofit or private developers that got federal, state, and local funding, tax credits in many cases,
Right.
to stand up income restricted or subsidized housing. But the city plays a really important role at monitoring and providing orchestrating the lottery and waitlist
Right.
processes.
Affordable units.
So in day to day, it looks super sort of manual and inefficient, right? It's literally resident calling. Hey, I heard there's an application wait list. Can
Wow.
I submit? Maybe there's a PDF, or hey, come by City Hall to apply. Here's a
Right.
PDF. So we are fully focused on that kind of pain point. So our goal there is for our city, where the cities that we work with, their housing team, we want to dramatically reduce the administrative burden that they have. And then the hope
Yeah.
and the plan there is that then they can shift that time to much more higher impact activities. So, spending more time in the community, or, innovating on different processes, right, that they wouldn't have had sort of the capacity to do before.
Yeah. How, I guess, like, how have you, what have you seen in terms of user adoption? Because I would say, like, just as like you see difficulties with city agencies changing,
Yeah,
the population that typically needs resources for affordable housing, etc., are also ones that are not accessing the most technologically advanced resources or have relied on such systems maybe for a long time.
yeah.
How are you helping the user end of things also adapt?
Yeah, and this is where our philosophy around this is that the burden on that sort of adoption has to be on us as a company. And so we believe it starts at the very beginning with the design process, right? And thinking
Mhm.
about what do the users expect today, 2024, with the latest sort of expectations on user behavior, which is different than even 2 years ago, right? Especially with
Yeah,
sort of the proliferation of ChatGPT, right? Where this notion of, okay, I'm not really sure what conversational AI is, but actually it doesn't require that much, or any sort of training or literacy around it at all. You could sort of just start naturally talking, right? So that's been a game changer for our early users, whether it's admin or
yeah,
residents, is to basically, because we're leveraging conversational AI, reduces the traditional barrier of like, hey, we have to design very complex flows that, somebody like an elderly resident might struggle to understand. But if you are, as a primary sort of experience, anchoring on conversational AI,
yeah.
it doesn't mean you capture 100% of the use or sort of resident needs, but you dramatically improve the accessibility and sort of user satisfaction. So that's been a game changer. But there's still so many other challenges, right? Even getting folks to begin the process, like that's where we work so closely with our cities to figure out, okay, what is hand in hand with the city? How can we, one, start promoting access to the platform, one, and potentially even have um, physical touch points that previously hadn't existed. So one of our cities that suggested, like, what would it look like to have, a tablet or some sort of digital kiosk at City Hall with the conversational AI, available to whoever
Hmm.
walks in, right? So that's
Yeah,
exciting, where we're sort of blending, like, okay, traditional SaaS with some of the physical environment.
yeah. How do you plan, I guess, how do you plan on kind of getting cities to adapt to this? Because,
Mm,
I think it's one thing to makes a resource available, but like two, cities and governments are typically quite slower on adapting the latest technologies, and so governments have to go through procurement and
yeah,
process and bids typically to test out or to transition technologies or new services and processes, and that's why we see that fragmentation of like, oh, it'll, this new process is very good, but it's only for this one thing. How
yeah,
have you experienced kind of government procurement and actually getting government to utilize
yeah.
Onetera's software and product offerings?
Yeah, and that's sort of always top of mind for anyone who's trying to innovate in the space. I think our sort of success early on, or at least our initial momentum, has come directly from two really important sort of uh, habits or values, if you will, around how we're even designing the product. So one of the really sort of deliberate decisions we made from day one of the company was sort of have being super wide eyed that, hey, it's going to take, especially from my K-12 experience, understanding that, these institutions, risk management, they have a lot of stakeholder management they have to deal with. So the idea that you could just walk in and sort of deploy something is sort of is far from the case, right? And then layering on top the sort of the novelty of AI that can create a lot of like more uncertainty, right? But the number one thing we did early on was deliberately include city leaders, both elected officials and city administrators, in our early design process. So at the whiteboarding stage, alongside our designers and engineers, said, "Hey, let's get their buy-in, not when we're trying to sell them something, but when we're trying to really design something that fits their needs." And what we've seen is that's paid off tremendously in both the sort of trust building that needs to happen with any sort of government interaction, but
Hmm.
also the ability for folks to start championing for us alongside, with their peers at, adjacent municipalities, right? It's like it's one thing for an institution to adopt a pilot. It's another thing to adopt a pilot and have sort of the talking points and willingness and confidence in spreading the word, even at the early stages of our relationship with that institution, right? So that's the big bet we're making, is like if we can invest tremendous amount of time at the design stage and building the trust, then one, obviously we're going to have a better product because we're building something that is really fulfilling needs. But two, it's going to create a flywheel in terms of sort of word of mouth and validation, especially with sort of our geographic focus of Southern California.
Hmm. Why did you choose to start out in California?
It's very straightforward, right? It goes back to what I just said. One, my other company was already here, so I was, based here.
Hmm.
I'm born and raised in LA, so a lot of long standing relationships are rooted here. But more importantly is if we were gonna sort of embed ourselves really early on with our city, so that we can have really great relationships and incredible sort of product development cycle. um, we knew that we could, even if we could help cities across the country, like it was so important that we dedicate like real in-person time to our local municipalities. And that's if you just take LA County, largest county in the country, but even
Hmm.
just beyond LA County, you have the Inland Empire, Orange County, all within 1 day driving distance, and we're talking 20 plus million residents. So our thinking is we can, one, build a better product and relationships by focusing on our backyard. But the other thing we're starting to notice is, going back to the network effects, is like there's so much overlap across these institutions and stakeholders in a very sort of regional context, which is like on the real estate side, there'll be affordable housing developers who cut across municipalities, right? There might be in 3 or 4 cities in a county, um, but it'd still be in the same county, right, or in the same geography. So it's helped us accelerate conversations, and it's sort of this like patchwork of relationships, but that is helping us open up in a very sort of geographic way more doors than if we were sort of just trying to get any city across the country.
Yeah. And like for startups that especially want to work with government, it is very complex. It is
Yeah,
very difficult to have to set up that process.
yeah,
Um, Walk us through, I think for the listeners, in the starting days back in, when you were first had this idea, how did you take it from idea to fruition for entrepreneurs who would like to perhaps innovate in a similar space or, just startups in general? How do you take it from 0 to 1, and especially from idea to kind of like you've built out the platform, you have a team now in place.
yeah,
What can other founders learn from you?
yeah. I think even before we officially started the company, I think the first thing, and this kind of goes back to like the advice part of this, is I've had probably collectively hundreds of conversations, a lot of those not directly to the problem we ended up solving, but that were required to get to the sort of conviction of the problem we're solving and how we're solving it. So even before we started we officially started, a lot of these like conversations and relationships, especially with elected officials, have gone back 2, 3 years of conversation. So I think that would be my very first sort of advice or to founders or folks who are thinking about it is don't underestimate the value of having tons of conversations with folks you want to eventually support in some way, right? And then being willing to just listen for a lot of those conversations as opposed to like come in and having a pitch. It's really important. So what happened because of those long-standing conversations and relationships is when we officially wanted to, okay, we're going to build this product or at least MVP and start developing it. It was much easier. It was still a lot of tremendous work to get people to even give you time when you're just an idea, but it was necessary to have people around the table that trust at least a vision, right, and know that hey, if we start building this, we're going to get momentum and go from there. But that was all from a lot of conversation. So in these spaces that are so complex in terms of the systems with government and highly regulated environments, it was so important to lean on relationships that were not built overnight. So that's number one. And then the other thing is like I think for something this complex, it just requires a lot of time with both a lot of designers and engineers around the table. That it's not like on paper I'm a solo founder, but it really has been an amazing sort of founding team and of early designers engineers that have gotten us to our sort of initial product.
Yeah, absolutely. How did you go about selecting your team, right? How do you build a really capable founding team? Employees, especially the first few employees, are critical to the culture of any startup as they scale. How
Yeah,
did you go about picking the right team for, for your venture?
yeah, I don't think there's a right answer to this at all. Everyone has their own style, and you want it to ultimately fit your personality as a founder.
Hmm.
My philosophy around this is to weigh heavily sort of the excitement for mission. So, like finding people who have genuine excitement for mission, especially early on where there's such little to sort of even show or to get people excited. So like I weigh so heavily, obviously like having clarity on skill set and ability to collaborate, but I just weigh so much the the sort of excitement level for the specific mission, and then being able like you don't like you want to think about if you're going to be working with this early team day and night. There's just has to be a almost irrational level of excitement for the mission because there's going to be so many months where it's just there's nothing public and there's just behind the scenes work, a lot of errors, issues that you're trying to resolve. So the only way I think, or the best thing to do upfront in terms of the selection process is to um, be biased towards people with the very high level of excitement because it's only going to get tested, and especially in the early days. So that was like the biggest filter early on, and then leaning on a lot of referrals, like especially as a second time founder here, it's I get the privilege of having a previous network of folks I either work with or have met over the years. So you sort of can lean on the extended network to for referrals, and that plays a big role in the pipeline early on, which I didn't have for my first go around.
That's totally fair. I guess as a serial entrepreneur, at least, having at least one startup experience
Yeah.
that have scaled successfully under your belt, what are some key lessons that founders could learn from you, going from a first to a second venture, perhaps that, mistakes or lessons you knew to take into
Mm.
consideration this time around that you didn't the first time?
Yeah, some of this is not news, like it's sort of talked about, but it was one of those some of these ideas um, finally sort of clicked the second time around, or at least after having made mistakes the first go around. One sort of this is related to team building is this notion of when you are recruiting somebody, if there's this bias to try, especially if you've invested time in conversations, there's this bias to, especially if there's like real need to have more capacity. Like the urge is always to like um, just get the recruiting process over with. So, I think many times it's like, okay, I think this is good enough, or like we're both excited, and then the human intuition is to like ignore any like negative things. Or sort of to be in this rosy mindset around recruiting, especially when everyone's excited and there's nothing wrong going, right? Because it's only roses at that point. So I would say is be willing. So it's really easy to pass on somebody who's not a fit from the get go, right? I think
Mm.
the hardest thing, but is actually I think the most important thing, as you know, now as a second time founder, is being willing to pass on uh, candidates who might be really good, great skill set, might not even have passion for the mission, and so like it checks off a lot
Mm.
of boxes,
Okay.
but then you know deep down that they're they aren't the best potential person for that role. That if you know that like either you've met somebody before or you just know that like they actually aren't sort of high caliber, especially at this stage, and um, and I think the most important thing I've learned is to be willing to say no, even if it causes like short term discomfort around, hey, we need more help, we need more capacity, but knowing that the upside of just like hiring the absolute best as much as possible, right? It's not binary, but it's like being willing
Of
to
course.
pass on okay people or okay team members for really so that you can keep the space open for really great team members will only have a multiplier effect. So I think that's the number one thing, but it's probably one of the hardest things from a team building perspective. The other thing I would say is, again, not a new idea, but I've just like sort of take it to heart now, which is being extremely focused and saying no to a lot of things early on so that you can move fast. Um, I'm just have a much more sort of awareness of how fast time goes, day to day, week to week, because uh, so I think a lot of founders make this mistake where there's this sense of, okay, if there's no fire, then I have a lot of time. But I think you miss the opportunity of creating early momentum internally with the team that sets a really great pace. If that is hard to do later on when you're already sort of 10, 12, 15 people, when
Right.
you're trying to like accelerate that. So now I'm a little paranoid of like, if we don't go as fast as we can and learn and iterate as quick as possible, like the default will actually be not like generic or sort of mediocre of it. It'd actually be like negative, like repercussions in terms of really good people leave, or you don't tap into network effects. I think, and the only way to move really fast is I think to be willing to stay focused and say no to a lot of like things that seem important but are actually aren't the most important.
It's now been about half a year or so, perhaps, right, from the
Yeah,
idea formation to now. What's the
yeah.
runway? What's the roadmap like for you for the remainder of this year?
Yeah, so 90% of our focus is always going to be success of our early pilots. So we're rolling out our initial pilots. We're working hand in hand with our first cities. Um, that's 90% of my focus, 90% of the team's focus. Then the 10% is going to be everything else, right? The 10% is, we're going to plan to raise a seed round in later this fall, probably late September, early October is the time frame we're looking at. we're gonna continue growing the team, so we're recruiting great people. But that's all 10% of our focus. 90% of our focus is build a really great product for pilots and make them really, really successful. And
Mhm.
then, you know, everything else I think falls in line after that. But if we can't have, amazing outcomes for the first few government institutions that we work with, then it doesn't matter how well, the other components of the startup journey are.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, what is kind of for people's awareness, and I
Yeah.
ask all the founders this is like, um, are you pre-seed? Are you seed? What's the kind of VC
Yeah.
traditional cycle that you're kind of going through
Yeah.
right now? What's the goal here?
Yeah, so this has been sort of a privilege in terms of a second time founder to be able to um, both self fund but also get angel investors that I've known for many years that invested in my previous company on board relatively quickly, and that's both great sign of support, but also it allows us to move relatively fast, faster than the average startup that might have to spend more time fundraising. But I think the goal now is I mentioned we're trying to raise our seed round in the fall. I think that getting our first institutional capital will be really important for us to one start um, really expanding beyond just initial pilots to full fledged bigger cities and more sort of infrastructure in place so that we can support institutions with in some cases hundreds of thousands of residents. So that's really important to get institutional capital. But then as part of that process, making sure to get really sort of mission aligned investors along with us. And there are so many people that I think maybe 4 or 5 years ago would have been maybe hesitant or had reservations about the space in terms of local government. But what's been awesome in the last few weeks is to get a lot of investor interest that I think understands the implications of the accessibility of conversational AI, and then understands at a very basic level is that yes, like these are very complex systems, but if you can sort of show value for the first few cities, then a lot of institutions are incentivized to follow along, right?
Yeah.
Because by default, a lot of these local governments have to cater to the needs of their residents. So for us, is it's a really exciting time to be starting these fundraising conversations because I just think there's so much excitement about um, AI thoughtfully being deployed in very complex, critical environments, and I would say local government represents that.
Absolutely. I mean, we've seen with AI like chat systems, right?
Yeah,
They're being experimented on by everybody,
yeah,
private, public, to kind of like augment into their services. Even at my last job for a public agency, they were experimenting with a non AI chatbot at that point. Who knows if
hmm
they integrated it? But we've also seen kind of like scenarios where the chat GPT variant or wrapped
hmm
function didn't work the best
yeah.
or just kind of serve that. How are you seeing those in practice? How are you ensuring or trying to mitigate at the very least such potential errors perhaps within kind of the AI chatbot systems?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. So one is always like anchoring on what the actual goal or outcome is that we're trying to improve. I think
Yeah.
it's so easy to like work back from like, okay, what can the technology do, and then try to find the problem after that. And for us, it's always this is just one piece of our stack, not our full stack. Is
Hmm.
saying we're gonna make sure that we're gonna deploy the best experience possible, and if the answer to that is agentic or conversational AI, then let's have that front and center. But there's so much of a traditional sort of digital experience that isn't necessarily AI, right? And then we also have to find the best method to deploy those experiences. So that's one thing, is like not having the entire experience rely
Yeah.
on this. So it's like our platform is AI native, but it's not AI only. So there's ability to access and take action not tied to the AI, which is really important, and because that doesn't disrupt the sort of end-to-end experience. It just augments it, right? Or it enhances it, if you will. The other part to this is like constant testing alongside our partners. And this is why it's so important that we're taking a very local approach to begin with, that it's not, hey, we're deploying AI across the country to some municipality that, we've gotten a couple of Zoom calls with. It's like, no, we're deploying AI to institutions that we are, one right now, especially like 15-minute drive away, that we can not just myself, it's our designers, engineers can go on site and speak to
Yeah.
residents, speak to admin. And two, like there's a trust that gets developed by being so close. So I think that's really important. I think it's being thoughtful about the guardrails that we're also putting. A lot of that is not unique to public sector. That's true of any sort of enterprise style sort of application of AI.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is just doing our sort of, it's our responsibility to keep up with the latest in best practices around safety and security. So one of our sort of early thought partners has been the smart cities team for NVIDIA, and they've really helped us both on the technical side, but also on the, communication and marketing piece of what we're doing.
That's wonderful. Um, Now that you've had a lot of these experiences leading teams, leading companies, what's kind of a day in the life for you? What do you do when you wake up to when you go to bed? What might other founders expect? Are you grinding
Yeah,
12-hour days, longer days, shorter days? Like, what is it like to
yeah.
be you, to be Felix?
Oh, okay. It's hard to summarize. I would say, like in a nutshell, the average day is probably like 70-80% spent on product. And that'll be the full range of product development. So,
Mhm.
our majority of our team right now are designers or engineers. So I spent the majority of my day checking with our designers, reviewing, wireframes and, different iterations of product decisions. And then I then also spend a good chunk of my day with our engineering team diving into like, okay, what's on our short-term roadmap? How can I help troubleshoot anything? That takes up a huge chunk of my day. I would say like interspersed throughout the day, I'm then also collaborating with either in-house like advisors around business development, so talking to our partners, cities, prospective partners, and really sort of building those relationships that can either convert to pilots and partnerships, or just learning about the industry. So, I'll try to get on at least a couple calls a week with folks that aren't going to be potential direct partners, but that know the space. That might be, an expert in affordable housing, or a former elected official who is now sort of consulting for different private sector companies, right?
Yes.
So that's really important to be able to represent the company this early on. But for now, because so much of our success is dependent on building a really great initial product, that to me is the number one area I can put my time on, is on the product development side of things.
Absolutely. Uh, what do you foresee with government and AI in general? I think as we approach the end of AI's been in the frame of mind for people in across the entire economy. Do you see government adapting innovations more widely now, or how do you think they would, in addition to, of course, the services that you provide, be able to better utilize AI in
Yeah,
providing the services to citizens, to residents more
yeah, I think,
effectively?
and this is obviously biased as a startup founder, but like I'm sort of forever optimistic about the innovation that it has to happen at the public sector level. Um, my first caveat to that is I just believe there will be more innovation. I think a majority of that will be driven alongside public institutions, but not
Hmm.
directly by public institutions. And the reason for that is one, and I don't think I think that's a great thing, right? I think it should be public sector leaders are collaborating with private sector companies to build
Right.
better experiences and products. But I don't think it should be necessarily the responsibility of those public institutions to create new solutions. They should just be willing to primarily be involved at the design process and then at the sort of feedback iteration process. So that's, I think, the number one role that public sector institutions can play because there's so many like mission aligned founders who believe that it's worth going through the effort of building these complex experiences. And I'm very hopeful that alongside that, investors across the full stack of private capital are going to sort of back that. I think there's parallelisms to the national federal innovation that's happening, and especially in the defense industry. Very different industries, but I think there's sort of piggybacking that the local government innovation can do from sort of those larger public sector institutions.
Absolutely. Well, Felix, thank you so much for
Yeah,
coming on the
it's awesome.
podcast, sharing your insights, and hopefully for other entrepreneurs out there, they can take some lessons from you to hopefully go off and do their own ventures.
Perfect. Thank you, William. I appreciate it.